To believe we know a work of art is to see only its surface, a silent image, frozen in time, an object of polite, admiring glances in the hallowed halls of a museum. But that is a comfortable illusion. Forget what you have been told. Forget the placid descriptions in university textbooks and gallery brochures. We are not here for a tour. We are descending into the deep, where art history collides with forensics, where conspiracy theories meet the anatomist's theater. We will peel back the glossy, time-cracked veneer of varnish to reveal what lies beneath the genius of the great masters. This is not a ranking, it is a decryption. We will expose 10 of the most guarded secrets, the most audacious ciphers embedded within the world's most celebrated paintings. Our criteria are not based on fame alone, but on the daring of the concept, the depth of the conspiracy, and the degree to which the hidden subtext shatters our perception of reality. The truth is always more complex, more unsettling, and far more fascinating than it first appears. Prepare yourself. You will never look at art the same way again. Our countdown begins with central clue was not merely hidden, but physically erased, or left to lie in plain sight for nearly 4 centuries. We open at number 10 with a work by the Dutch painter Hendrik van Antonissen. View of Scheveningen Sands, painted in the year 1641. It earns its place not for the complexity of its code, but for the sheer physical evidence of a crime. A perfect example of a secret that is not symbolic, but tangible, literally painted over. At first glance, it is a quintessential seascape from the Dutch Golden Age. A calm, almost melancholic scene on a beach near The Hague. A group of figures, dressed in dark, severe clothing, has gathered at the water's edge. They are staring at something, but at what, precisely, is impossible to say. Their gazes are fixed upon an empty space, a void on the sand. For 140 years, the painting hung in the Fitzwilliam Museum in Cambridge, one of Great Britain's most respected institutions. And for all those 140 years, generations of art historians, curators, and millions of visitors stood puzzled by this strange, awkward, almost absurd moment captured on canvas. The canvas, we are told, is a window to the past. But what if it is a lock? A carefully constructed facade, waiting for the right key, or the right eye, to reveal the truths it was designed to conceal. The composition was an enigma, a violation of every known rule of the genre. Why had these people gathered? What invisible spectacle held their gaze, so powerful that an artist deemed it worthy of capture? The absence of a focal point, of any central event, rendered the painting strange, incomplete, almost a failure. But what if its hero, its tragic protagonist, had been deliberately and cold-bloodedly erased from the scene? In the year 2014, the painting underwent a routine restoration. A conservator, Shan Kwang, began the painstaking process of removing a layer of old, time-yellowed varnish, when she noticed an anomaly. In the very section of the canvas where the crowd's attention was fixed, the texture of the paint, its chemical signature, was subtly different. It was the unmistakable sign of a later hand, an intervention that occurred long after the original artist had set down his brush. Using the most advanced technologies of our age, X-ray beams and infrared spectroscopy, the restoration team was able to peer beneath the surface, to look through the top layer of paint. What they found, emerging from the black and white scans, was an absolute shock. Hidden beneath the serene layer of sky and water lay the gigantic, massive, dark form of a sperm whale beached upon the shore. Suddenly, in a single moment, everything fell into place. The painting came alive, flooded with a new and profound drama. These were not aimless figures on a beach. They were witnesses to an event that was both magnificent and terrifying. In the 17th century, a beached whale was no mere zoological curiosity. It was an omen, a harbinger of God's wrath or of disasters yet to come. It was a public spectacle, drawing crowds from across the countryside. It was an event that would be debated for weeks in taverns, in churches, and in the market squares. The painting was transformed from a meaningless sketch into a gripping piece of historical reportage. A new, even more intriguing question. Who painted over the whale? When did they do it? And most importantly, why? Further investigation revealed the erasure was relatively recent, likely occurring in the 18th or even 19th century. The most plausible theory points to an enterprising, if not entirely scrupulous, art dealer, or one of the painting's former owners. Perhaps they decided that the image of an enormous, dead animal was simply too unpleasant, too repulsive, and would hinder a profitable sale. A calm, peaceful landscape, after all, was far more marketable than a scene dominated by a decaying carcass. And so, with a few strokes of a brush, an unknown editor did more than just alter a painting. They cut out its very essence, its soul, its nerve. They converted a dramatic report into a hollow, pointless sketch. For nearly 2 centuries, the truth lay dormant, painted over by commerce and convenience. It took the unblinking eye of technology to finally peel back the lie, to restore not just an image, but the truth it was meant to tell. A truth that reminds us how easily history can be rewritten, and how what we see is so often defined by what has been hidden. Sometimes the greatest secret is not what an artist has cleverly concealed, but what has been hiding in plain sight for centuries. A truth so microscopic, so masterfully embedded in the canvas, that it would take 400 years for technology to catch up to the artist's audacity. It lies within a painting by the genius and the curse of the Baroque era, Michelangelo Merisi da Caravaggio. Painted around 1595, his work, Bacchus, is a study in rebellion. Caravaggio was no mere artist. He was the rock star of his age, a figure of scandal, a duelist, a brawler, a murderer. His short, brilliant, and tragic life was a thriller as visceral as his art. He despised the idealized, heavenly figures of the Renaissance. He painted not gods and saints, but real, flawed human beings, with dirt beneath their fingernails and a dangerous glint in their eyes. His Bacchus, the ancient god of wine and ecstasy, is no exception. This is not a radiant Olympian deity. This is a street boy from a Roman tavern draped in a sheet. His gaze is languid, ambiguous, his face slightly swollen. With hands that are not entirely clean, he offers a goblet of cheap wine. This is the essence of Caravaggio's vision, the divine dragged down to the level of the earthly, the carnal, the real. But the true challenge, the artist's most defiant act, is not in the god's face, nor in his posture. It is locked away in the wine itself. In the lower left corner, a glass carafe sits on the table. For centuries, art historians admired the bright glint of light on its curved surface, a reflection from an unseen window. It was seen as a simple testament to the painter's virtuosic skill. Then, in 2009, using multispectral reflectography, a technology that peers beneath the layers of aged paint, Researchers looked closer. They zoomed into that simple glint of light, magnifying it as no one had ever done before. And there, in the tiny, distorted reflection on the wine's dark surface, they found a face. It was a minuscule, barely discernible self-portrait of Caravaggio himself. He is there, at his easel, brush in hand, with his dark hair and intense stare, captured in the very act of creating the masterpiece. This is no simple artist's signature, no playful hidden detail. It is an incredibly audacious, almost blasphemous declaration. While other painters of his time modestly signed their names in a corner, Caravaggio placed himself inside his creation, at its very mythological heart. He is not merely depicting a god, he is asserting his own power. In that single, hidden image, he becomes more than a painter. He is the demiurge, the creator of this world, forever present, forever watching from within the very substance of his art. He is not just telling the story, he is the story. Why so small? Why so deliberately concealed? Perhaps it was his signature flourish, a secret seal understood only by him, a mark of profound pride, of self-assertion in the face of the divine. Or perhaps, hidden within it, lies a deeper philosophical truth. Bacchus, the god of revelry, offers the viewer a glass of wine. It is a symbol of temptation, of sin, of oblivion, an altered state of consciousness. And there, in the murky reflection of that very wine, sits the artist himself, Caravaggio, a man who, more than any other, understood these states intimately. He is not merely offering a drink. He is offering a glimpse of the world through his eyes, the eyes of a man who knew, in equal measure, the divine light of inspiration and the impenetrable darkness of his own vices. It is an act of breathtaking genius, not a riddle for the viewer to solve, but an intimate, almost narcissistic message to himself, encrypted with a technique that outpaced his own era by 4 centuries. But some secrets are not placed by an artist's pride. They are ghosts the artist tried to vanquish. This is the story not of what a painter chose to add to a canvas, but of what he desperately sought to erase, and failed. It is a story of phantoms from the past, literally bleeding through the paint. We speak of Pablo Picasso and his famously heart-wrenching work, The Old Guitarist, painted between late 1903 and early 1904. It is one of the most iconic images from his so-called blue period, a time of absolute destitution, of deep depression and unending grief, triggered by the suicide of his close friend, the artist Carlos Casagemas. The entire canvas seems rendered not with pigment, but with frozen tears. The distorted, elongated, almost incorporeal figure of a blind old man clutches his guitar, as a drowning man might grasp for a final breath, the only thing he has left in a cold and unforgiving world. The color blue dominates. It saturates the air, the man's body, his clothes. It is the color of sorrow, the color of despair, the color of death. The painting is an overwhelmingly powerful emotional statement, a cry from the soul of a young artist. But what if, beneath this thick layer of grief, there lies another image entirely? For decades, art historians and conservators had noted strange contours, uneven textures on the canvas that did not seem to correspond to the guitarist's form, especially around his neck and head. For a long time, these were dismissed as quirks of Picasso's expressive style. But in 1998, on the eve of a major exhibition, specialists at the Art Institute of Chicago decided to scan the painting. They would use a technology new for its time, an infrared camera, capable of peering through sorrow, through pigment, through time itself. For what is a canvas, if not a battlefield of memory, where the artists first ver the truth of their struggle? A penetrating gaze of light, piercing the veil of the visible world. This method allows rays to journey through the upper layers of pigment, to see what lies beneath, to witness the ghosts of abandoned ideas. What this light unveiled within a masterpiece was staggering. Beneath the image of a dying old guitarist, a spectral form emerged, as clear as an X-ray plate, the ghost of another, earlier painting. It was a woman's portrait, a young woman with long, dark hair, seated, her left arm outstretched. Near her feet, the faint outlines of a small child and an animal, perhaps a bull or a cow, could be discerned. A completely different scene, a completely different mood, an allegory, perhaps, of motherhood, of life itself. Why would Picasso entomb such a scene? The answer, at first glance, is brutally prosaic. Crushing poverty. During his Parisian period, the artist was so destitute he often could not afford the price of a meal. Let's he deemed failures and painted over them. It was a measure born of desperation. But in the case of the old guitarist, this practice gave birth to something far more profound than mere economy. The ghost of the woman never truly vanished. As the years passed, the upper layer of paint thinned, and her contours began to bleed through the iconic blue, merging with the figure of the old man. The result is a haunting, almost mystical, multi-layered effect. It is no longer just a portrait of a destitute musician. It is a painting about loss, about the strata of memory. An old man who has lost his sight, and perhaps his family, and a woman with a child, lost beneath a layer of paint, but still ass. Picasso, perhaps unintentionally, had created a perfect palimpsest, an ancient manuscript written over an erased text, where the faint, older letters still press through the new. Technology revealed not a secret code or a hidden intent, but a tragic necessity. A necessity that, in turn, gave birth to a new, deeper, and more complex meaning, one of which the artist himself may have been entirely unaware. Where one masterpiece reveals a ghost born of necessity, another confronts us with a phantom deliberately engineered. Here we find not a spirit, but a tangible, material object, intentionally and brilliantly distorted, as if a spy from another dimension is looking out from the canvas, reminding us of the most final and inescapable truth. The work is The Ambassadors, a masterwork by the German artist Hans Holbein the Younger, painted in 1533 during his time in England. At first glance, it is a quintessential portrait of status and power, a depiction of two vastly influential and educated men of their era. On the left, Jean de Dinteville, the French ambassador to the court of King Henry VIII. On the right, his friend, Bishop Georges de Selve, also in London on a diplomatic mission. They stand with confidence, leaning on a high shelf laden with the instruments of science, art, and exploration, symbols of their mastery over the known world. Yet beneath their feet, something is profoundly wrong. The room is a declaration, crowded with objects that testify to status, erudition, and power. Here lies everything that symbolized human might in the age of the Renaissance. A celestial globe, a sundial, complex navigational instruments. These are symbols of dominion over the world, over space and time itself. Books, scientific treatises, a lute, emblems of a profound mastery of the arts and sciences. But look closer. A single string on the lute is broken. This is no accident. It is a subtle, discordant note, an allusion to religious schism, to a harmony lost in a Christian world being torn asunder by the Reformation. The painting is an intellectual puzzle, a hymn to human achievement, to science and diplomacy. Yet all of it is merely a brilliant diversion. Because the true protagonist of this work, its hidden, essential meaning, is not found on the shelf. It lies below, on the mosaic floor. Between the two proud, self-assured ambassadors, a strange, elongated, blurred shape cuts diagonally across the space. It seems a defect, an artist's error, something alien and out of place within this impeccably realistic composition. For a long time, this was the painting's greatest mystery. But the secret is revealed the moment you stop looking at the canvas head-on. You must step away from it, move to the far right edge, crouch down, and view the surface from an exceptionally acute angle. And then, a true optical miracle occurs. The distorted, incomprehensible smudge resolves into a perfectly clear, anatomically correct, three-dimensional image of a human skull. This is anamorphosis, a sophisticated technique of optical illusion. Holbein was its unrivaled virtuoso, and he employed it here for a purpose far greater than simple entertainment. The skull in painting is the classic symbol of memento mori, the Latin phrase meaning, "Remember, you must die." Its placement here is a stroke of philosophical and directorial genius. As long as you, the viewer, stand directly before the painting, you see the world as the ambassadors do. A world of power, wealth, science, earthly concerns, and intrigue. In this world, death is just a strange, unintelligible distortion on the periphery, easily dismissed. But the moment you change your point of view, the moment you physically step aside from this worldly vanity, you see the truth. Death. From this oblique perspective, it is the only real, undistorted object in an otherwise illusory world. Holbein is telling us that it does not matter how rich, how intelligent, or how influential you are. It does not matter how many globes and lutes you possess. Death will come for everyone. It is the great equalizer, and its true face can only be seen by looking at life from another, indirect angle. It is an intellectual labyrinth, a spiritual pilgrimage for the eye, a work that compels the viewer not merely to look, but to move, to participate, to shift one's own position, until a profound and timeless revelation is reached. This is a canvas that is not merely a portrait. It is a meticulously drafted legal document, encrypted in symbols, and within it lies its most audacious secret. The signature of an artist who transforms himself from a mere painter into a chief witness, a notary of the soul. We are speaking of the Arnolfini portrait, created by the Netherlandish master Jan van Eyck in the year 1434. It remains, without exaggeration, one of the most enigmatic and scrutinized paintings of the Northern Renaissance. We find ourselves in the home of the wealthy Italian merchant Giovanni di Niccolao Arnolfini and his wife in the prosperous city of Bruges. Every detail, every object in this seemingly modest room cries out with the story of wealth and high social standing. A magnificent brass chandelier, expensive oriental carpets, the velvet and fur of their attire. Even the oranges, resting on the windowsill and chest, in the 15th century Netherlands, they were an exotic and impossibly expensive import from the south, a potent symbol of affluence. But what is truly happening here? What event has the artist immortalized? For centuries, a single theory held sway, that we are witnessing a wedding or a betrothal taking place in the privacy of the home. The man and woman join hands in a gesture of solemn oath. A single candle, burning in the chandelier in the light of day, is thought to symbolize the all-seeing eye of God, His invisible presence sanctifying their union. The small dog at their feet is a traditional emblem of fidelity. The discarded shoes in the foreground suggest they stand on the holy ground of their own hearth and home. The painting appears to be a perfect allegory of Christian marriage. But is the solution so simple? Modern scholarship increasingly casts doubt on this matrimonial narrative. Could this be a memorial portrait, commissioned after the wife's death? A subtle clue may lie in the chandelier. The candle above the husband burns brightly, while the one above the wife is extinguished. Or perhaps this is not a wedding at all, but something else entirely. A complex legal act, granting the wife the authority to conduct her husband's business in his absence, a common practice within the merchant class of the era. The greatest, most undeniable, and ingenious secret of this painting resides at its compositional heart. On the back wall, precisely between the couple, hangs a small, round, convex mirror. This is no mere detail of interior design. It is a portal to another dimension of the painting, its semantic key. Reflected in the mirror, with breathtaking mastery, are not only the backs of Arnolfini and his wife. Reflected within it is the world that lies before them. Two other figures stand in the doorway, observing the scene. And just above the mirror, written in elegant script upon the wall, are the words, Johannes de Eyck fuit hic, 1434. Jan van Eyck was here, 1434. The artist is no longer an observer. He is a participant, a legal witness inscribed directly into the record. The painting ceases to be a simple depiction and becomes a sworn testimony, a document where art and reality are fused. It is a declaration that the artist does not just capture a moment, but verifies its existence, forever blurring the line between the world he paints and the one he inhabits. Our gaze is drawn not to the central couple, but to the wall behind them, to a convex mirror, a perfect circle of reflected reality. And there, captured in its distorted lens, in the open doorway of the room, stand two minuscule figures, one in blue, the other in red. Witnesses. Directly above the mirror, an elegant, almost defiant script is inscribed upon the wall in Latin. Johannes de Eyck fuit hic, 1434. The translation is not the standard humble artist's credit, Jan van Eyck made this. It is something far more personal, more audacious, a declaration. Jan van Eyck was here. This is not a signature on a work of art. It is the testimony of an eyewitness on a legal document. Van Eyck is not merely the painter. He is stating in plain text that he was physically present for this moment. And one of the two figures in that mirror is, almost certainly, the artist himself. In an instant, the painting transforms. It ceases to be a simple portrait and becomes a notarized record, the artist recast as an official witness. The mirror is no longer a mere display of optical mastery. It is the point of intersection between the world of the viewer and the world of the painting. It is the portal where art and reality converge, where the painter becomes a participant in the universe of his own creation, and we, the spectators, become collaborators in the mystery, peering over the master's shoulder. But what if a painting's hidden layer is not a declaration, but a coded confession? What if a scene of apparent tranquility is in fact a mask for profound tragedy? The masterpiece is Vincent van Gogh's Café Terrace at Night, painted in Arles in the south of France in September of 1888. At first glance, it is a pure, unclouded hymn to life. A terrace gilded with the warm, almost tangible light of gas lamps, set beneath a deep, velvet southern sky, punctured by stars that seem to pulse with a life of their own. Patrons linger at their tables, lost in conversation. The canvas radiates a calm and comfort that is startling for Van Gogh. It is one of those rare, precious moments in his work, devoid of anguish, of madness, of the swirling vortex of despair. Here, there is only the quiet, contemplative joy of existence. For more than a century, this was the accepted truth, until a group of independent researchers proposed a new, radical, and shocking interpretation. They claim that Café Terrace at Night is a secret, encrypted, and reimagined version of an entirely different masterpiece, Leonardo da Vinci's The Last Supper. The idea seems preposterous. How could this bright, vibrant scene be compared to Leonardo's fresco of betrayal and impending doom? One is a celebration of the everyday, the other a depiction of the most somber and dramatic scene in the New Testament. And yet, the theory persists. It forces us to look closer, past the golden light and the placid figures, into the shadows. It suggests that within this image of simple peace lies a brilliant, hidden narrative, a puzzle left by a troubled genius, waiting to be solved. Observe the patrons, gathered at the tables under the gaslight. There are precisely 12, a number that resonates with another, far more famous supper, the 12 apostles of Leonardo's masterpiece. In the composition's very center, a long-haired figure stands, almost a conductor to the scene, dressed in a tunic of luminous white. On the surface, he is merely a waiter attending to his guests, but his central position, his garments, his commanding posture, they are a startling echo of the figure of Christ. Look deeper. Directly behind him, the mullion of a window forms a clear, undeniable cross. A coincidence? Perhaps. But there is more. One of the 12 diners, a dark and nearly featureless silhouette, is depicted with his back to us, slipping away from the scene through a shadowed doorway, melting into the gloom. Is this Judas, leaving the supper after his betrayal has been revealed? Vincent van Gogh was the son of a Protestant pastor. He was raised in a deeply religious household, intimately familiar with the scriptures. In his youth, he had a desperate, burning desire to become a preacher himself. Religious motifs and allegories were not merely academic to him. They were etched into the very fabric of his consciousness. In his famous letters to his brother Theo, he wrote of a passionate ambition to create a new, modern religious art, an art for the common person, stripped of medieval dogma and pretense. The Café Terrace, then, may be that very attempt. A brilliant, audacious effort to transpose a great biblical narrative into a contemporary, everyday, almost banal setting. It is a declaration that the divine, that miracle and tragedy are not confined to ancient temples, but can be found here, in the humble glow of a street-side gas lamp. This revolutionary theory completely reframes our perception of the artist. Van Gogh, the mad genius, instinctively splashing his turbulent emotions onto the canvas, is transformed into a subtle intellectual, a thinker and theologian capable of encoding a complex, multi-layered allegory into what appears to be a simple street scene. If Van Gogh's masterpiece conceals a sacred story in a secular disguise, another work, from centuries earlier, presents a mystery that is far more explicit. We speak of the enigmatic painting, The Madonna with Saint Giovannino, attributed to the brush of Domenico Ghirlandaio, an outstanding master of the 15th century Florentine school and the teacher of Michelangelo himself. The painting, exhibited in the Palazzo Vecchio in Florence, appears at first glance to be a work of conventional devotion. But over the Madonna's left shoulder, something inexplicable hangs in the sky. A dark, disc-shaped object from which golden rays of light emanate. Below it, on a distant cliff, a man shields his eyes, his dog barking at the strange apparition above. For ufologists and theorists of ancient contact, it is the ultimate proof. For art historians, a baffling anomaly. But for all who see it, the painting poses a question that transcends art, faith, and time itself. A question it seems to answer with a silent, painted affirmation. These masterworks, separated by 400 years, remind us that a canvas is never just a surface, it is a portal. They challenge us to look past the obvious, to find the profound in the mundane, and to question the very nature of the reality they depict. Perhaps the greatest art does not provide answers, but instead embeds the eternal questions deep within the pigment and oil, leaving us to forever search for meaning in the shadows and the light. It is a scene of canonical grace, a tender and sacred tableau. The Virgin Mary gazes with infinite love upon the infant Christ resting on her lap. Beside them, the young John the Baptist stands in a posture of prayerful devotion. Everything is serene, pious, a perfect specimen of early Renaissance art. But this profound peace, this celestial harmony, is fractured by a single, utterly shocking detail, hidden in the background sky. Look closely over Mary's right shoulder. There, hanging suspended in the daylight, is a strange, dark, ovoid form, its outline sharp and deliberate. It is motionless and appears to radiate brilliant golden rays. This is no bird. It is no angel. It is not a flaw in the canvas, nor the decay of time and flaking paint. It is a meticulously rendered, material, three-dimensional object. A flying disc, complete with what appears to be a cupola and ports. But that is not all. Below, on a rocky outcrop, stands the tiny figure of a man, a shepherd. He shields his eyes with his hand, recoiling from a brilliant light, his gaze locked in a mixture of awe and alarm upon the strange object above. Beside him, his dog is also looking up, its body tense, seemingly barking in a frenzy at the inexplicable phenomenon. To the modern eye, an imagination shaped by science fiction and reports of aerial encounters, the identity of this object seems self-evident. A classic flying saucer. An unidentified flying object. Yet this painting was created in the 15th century, nearly 500 years before that term would even exist. Centuries before the Roswell incident, before the dawn of human aviation itself. Conventional art historians, of course, attempt to furnish a rational, terrestrial explanation. They suggest it might be a symbolic representation of a cloud, from which an angel appears, as in scenes of the Annunciation. Or perhaps it is a comet, or a simple allegory for the divine light of God's presence. But none of these explanations withstand scrutiny. The object is too material, too technological to be a simple cloud. And the raw, genuine reaction of the man and his dog on the ground below suggests they are witnessing something real, physical, and profoundly out of the ordinary. This painting is not alone. Dozens of medieval and Renaissance works, frescoes, tapestries, and canvases feature strange, disc-shaped or cigar-shaped objects observing biblical events from the heavens. But the Madonna with Saint Giovannino remains the most lucid, the most detailed, the most undeniable example. Its secret reaches far beyond the confines of art history, trespassing into the territory of the unexplained and posing a fundamental, unsettling question about our own past. Was this merely an artist's flourish, an allegory that our modern, spacefaring age has simply misinterpreted? Or is it a faithful depiction of a truth we are not yet prepared to accept? A testament hiding in plain sight to a history that was not entirely our own. Perhaps the artists of the past, with their sharpened sense of observation, were witness to something we are only now, 5 centuries later, beginning to comprehend. Here lies not merely a painting, but a Pandora's box, an intellectual time bomb overflowing with codes, prophecies, heretical theories, and musical ciphers. It is a work of art that has suffered more than perhaps any other in history. From the ravages of time, from Napoleonic soldiers who used its hall as a stable, from the bombings of World War II, and from the clumsy hands of dozens of restorers. Yet with every scar, its secrets have only deepened. Its enigmas have grown more profound. This is The Last Supper by Leonardo da Vinci. It is a monumental fresco, occupying an entire wall in the refectory of the Dominican monastery of Santa Maria della Grazia in Milan. But this is no simple illustration of a biblical narrative. It is a masterful psychological thriller, frozen in a single, supremely tense moment. The very instant after Christ has uttered the fateful, explosive words, "Truly, I say to you, one of you will betray me." L itself, but the immediate, cascading chain reaction to those words. The 12 apostles, as if struck by an electric current, erupt into motion. Their figures are broken into 4 perfectly composed groups of 3, and each group is a veritable storm of human emotion. Shock, anger, fear, denial, bewilderment. But beneath this masterfully orchestrated drama, layers of mystery hide in plain sight. Layers that researchers and theorists are still working to decipher. The most famous and most heretical of these theories, popularized by the writer Dan Brown, posits that the figure to Christ's right is not the young, beardless Apostle John, as tradition holds. It is, in fact, Mary Magdalene, his secret wife, and the true inheritor of his teachings. Proponents point to the figure's overtly feminine appearance, the delicate hands, and the way their 2 bodies form a distinct letter M in the negative space between them, a symbol, perhaps, for matrimony. But this is merely the tip of the iceberg, the most mainstream of its enigmas. In 2007, an Italian musician and computer technician named Giovanni Maria Palla made an even more incredible, almost mystical discovery. He hypothesized that Leonardo, who was also a renowned musician and inventor of instruments, could have encrypted a melody into his masterwork. Palla superimposed 5 lines of a musical staff across the fresco. He discovered that the hands of the apostles and the loaves of bread on the table align on the... Reading them from right to left, in the mirror image script that Leonardo himself favored, he derived a 40-second musical composition. When it was played on a pipe organ, the sound that emerged was not random. It was a somber, mournful requiem. A funeral dirge, hidden for 500 years, waiting for a new way of seeing. A final, haunting score for a moment of betrayal, composed by a mind that saw the world not as it was, but as a universe of interconnected secrets, all waiting to be unlocked. a tragic, soul-rendering requiem stretching across a wall in Milan. It is a scene of betrayal, a final farewell frozen in time. But within its fading pigments, there is more than sorrow. A Vatican investigator, Sabrina Sforza Galizia, declared she had deciphered a complex mathematical and astrological code buried within the fresco. According to her findings, Leonardo had predicted the precise date for the end of the world. It would begin, she claims, on March 21st, in the year 4006, as a new, universal flood. A deluge that would wash humanity from the face of the earth, concluding on November 1st of that same year, heralding the dawn of a new era. The key to this prophecy is said to be encrypted in the symbols of the zodiac and in the mathematical formulas hidden within the central window above Christ, and in the very arrangement of the figures themselves. The Last Supper is not a painting. It is a multi-layered puzzle. Theological, musical, mathematical, conspiratorial. Most astonishingly, even in its semi-ruined, almost spectral state, it continues to generate new mysteries, proving that the genius of Leonardo was truly boundless, perhaps not entirely human. And then there is the other masterpiece. A work so famous, so expensive, so guarded and reproduced, it seems to have been studied to exhaustion. The Mona Lisa. Its most prominent mysteries, the enigmatic, elusive smile, the debate over the model's identity, the strange, unreal landscape at her back, have become part of popular culture, worn into cliché. But what if the true, most profound secrets of the Gioconda were only discovered recently? What if they are far stranger, far more shocking than anything we have ever been told? Everyone knows of her smile, how it appears and vanishes depending on where you look. Leonardo achieved this almost hypnotic effect through a technique he invented, sfumato. Layers of glaze as thin as smoke, blurring the contours between light and shadow. When you look directly at her lips, your central vision, responsible for clarity, sees them plainly, and the smile disappears. When you look at her eyes, the blurred corners of her mouth enter your peripheral vision, which is more sensitive to shadow, and your brain itself completes the smile. It is a brilliant neurobiological trick, one that anticipated science by centuries. But this is not a secret. It is a technique. The real secrets, the true conspiracy, would only begin to surface when the unblinking eye of 21st century technology was turned upon her face. For more than a decade, the French scientist Pascal Cotte dedicated his life to a single obsession. At his company, Lumiere Technology, he engineered a unique multispectral camera, a device capable of a kind of spectral archaeology. It captures images in 13 different bands of light, allowing it to digitally peel back the layers of a parkable eye upon the world's most famous portrait. What he found sent shockwaves through the foundations of art history. Beneath the final version we see in the Louvre, he discovered no less than 3 different images. One was a simple outline of a head, a different size, with a different hairstyle. But deeper still, he unearthed something truly shocking. An authentic, complete, and finished portrait of an entirely different woman. She sits in the same pose, but her head is turned aside, and on her face, there is no hint of that enigmatic smile. Cotte is certain this is the original portrait of Lisa Gherardini, the wife of the Florentine silk merchant Francesco del Giocondo, who is believed to have commissioned the work. The woman we all know as Mona Lisa, he argues, was painted over this original at a later time, a portrait of a different person, or perhaps an idealized composite vision. The inescapable conclusion is as simple as it is profound. The Mona Lisa may not be the Mona Lisa at all. But the canvas had not yet yielded all its secrets. Italian researchers, magnifying ultra-high-resolution digital copies to their absolute limit, claimed to have found microscopic letters and numbers entombed in the dark paint of her eyes. In the right eye, they could just discern the Latin letters LV, perhaps the initials of Leonardo da Vinci himself. In the left, the letters CE, or possibly a B, which remain undeciphered. And in the arch of the bridge, far in the background, the number 72. What could it all mean? Theories range from the arcane to the outlandish, references to Kabbalistic texts, hidden mathematical formulas, even geographical coordinates. Each new scientific inquiry provides no final answers, but instead gives birth to new, more complex, and more bewildering questions. We have been looking at her for 500 years, and we still do not know who she is, how many ghosts reside upon that single canvas, or what cryptic message the most mysterious genius in human history encrypted in her gaze. Yet even this profound mystery pales before a secret hidden not in shadow, but in the most brilliant light, at the very heart of Western faith. On the most famous ceiling in the world, within the personal chapel of the Pope, lies a message. A truth so audacious, so blasphemous in its design, and yet so brilliant in its execution, it completely changes our understanding of not only the artist, but of the very nature of creation itself. It suggests that the greatest works are not merely objects to be seen, but dialogues across centuries, waiting for us to finally learn the language they speak. It is a story of the eternal, irreconcilable conflict between science and religion, between reason and faith. At its center, Michelangelo Buonarroti, and the most famous fresco on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, The Creation of Adam. Billions of people know this image. It has become an icon of Western civilization. God the Father, a mighty gray-bearded patriarch, rushes through the heavens, enveloped by a host of angels. He extends his right hand toward the first man, the beautiful and languid Adam, to breathe life into his form. Their fingers, suspended in a moment of supreme tension, almost touch. This is the spark of life, the divine impulse, the great act of creation. It is a symbol of faith known to all. And now, forget everything you have just seen, completely. Look at the figure of God one more time. But do not look at God himself. Look at what surrounds him, at the gigantic, purpled within it. Does it remind you of anything? In the year 1990, an American physician named Frank Meshberger, a specialist in neuroanatomy, was leafing through an art book when he experienced a profound revelation. As a professional, he saw something that had eluded hundreds of generations of art historians for nearly 5 centuries. The outline of that purple mantle, with the angels nestled inside, mirrors the contour of a human brain in sagittal section, with an astonishing, almost photographic precision. This is no mere resemblance. Every detail is in its place. The Sylvian fissure, which separates the frontal lobe from the parietal, aligns perfectly with the back of an angel and the leg of God himself. The cerebellum, the brainstem, the major arteries, every key component is anatomically exact. A green scarf, flowing downward, flawlessly traces the path of the vertebral artery. An angel's leg, dangling from the bottom of the mantle, points directly to the location of the pituitary gland, the master conductor of the entire human organism. This cannot be coincidence. The probability of such a convergence of details is functionally zero. Michelangelo, in defiance of the Church's strictest prohibitions, secretly dissected human corpses. He studied anatomy with a practitioner's eye, committing an act then considered a mortal sin. He knew the interior landscape of the human brain, and he concealed it at the very center of his greatest religious work. In the heart of the Vatican, what message was he sending? The possibilities are staggering in their audacity. The simplest interpretation is that God is giving Adam not just life, but reason, intellect, consciousness. The divine gift, then, is the human mind itself. But there is another, far more daring and nearly heretical reading. Perhaps Michelangelo, a man of the Renaissance, a humanist and a scientist, intended to say something else entirely. That God is not an old man floating in the heavens. That God is a creation of our own minds, an idea that exists only within us, within the intricate, hidden architecture of the human brain. It was an act of breathtaking intellectual audacity, a calculated refutation of church dogma, delivered not in secret, but in plain sight, within the walls of its most sacred sanctuary. And to ensure his true, rebellious intentions left no room for doubt, Michelangelo embedded another signature within the chapel. In a different section of the ceiling, in the portrait of the prophet Zechariah, a figure widely believed to be a caricature of the very man who commissioned the work, the hated Pope Julius II, a small angel lurks behind his shoulder. The cherubic figure makes a deeply offensive gesture, an ancient and vulgar sign of contempt. It was a personal, encoded message of defiance, a silent act of rebellion directed at his all-powerful patron. This secret does more than add a curious detail. It fundamentally alters the work's very soul. It transforms a hymn to divinity into a hidden manifesto of humanism, a quiet but eternal triumph of science over dogma. Once such truths are unveiled, the great masterpieces of the past can never be viewed through the same eyes again. They cease to be static artifacts, becoming instead living dialogues, forever echoing the silent rebellions of their creators.